Don't worry, that fool is taking care of you for free anyway, and after you die, we'll quickly kick her out the door. These words, accidentally spilling out of the speakers of the old tablet, shattered my reality into tiny pieces exactly 3 weeks ago. At that moment, time seemed to stop. The air in the room became thick, heavy like lead, and I stopped hearing anything except this mechanical, cold voice of my stepmother, which forever erased everything I believed in. But to understand how I arrived at this audio proof of my own betrayal, we need to go back a few years. To the point where my life was simple, clear, and, as I thought, completely safe. My name is Sophia, and I'm 34. Life after my mother's passing split into two absolute realities that never intersected at a single point. What life was like before her illness, and that dull, ringing emptiness that enveloped our family the day the heart monitor in the intensive care unit flattened into a straight, lifeless line. Mom wasn't just the center of our home. She was that invisible cement that held all the walls and all our emotional stability and balance. As long as she was alive, my dad Henry remained the head of the family, a strong, confident man capable of solving any problem. But as soon as she was gone, Dad seemed to slouch all at once, shrink in size, and within a couple of months turn into a deeply unhappy, lost old man who desperately feared being left alone within four walls. Back then, looking at his faded eyes and trembling fingers, I made an internal vow that became my unwritten law for years to come. I wouldn't abandon him. I would divide my life between his loneliness and my own plans. Welcome to Storytime Drama, the territory where other people's skeletons come tumbling out of the closet. We dive deep into real stories of shattered trust, cunning plots, and retribution. Take a pause from the endless hustle, pour your favorite drink, and let's find out together how today's story ends. Years went by, replacing one another in a succession of gray, routine days. Without noticing it myself, I transformed for my father not just into a loving daughter, but into a full-time caregiver, personal secretary, cook, driver, and staff psychologist all rolled into one. Every day of mine didn't begin with pleasant morning rituals, but with a mandatory dawn call. "Dad, good morning. Have you taken your blood pressure pills yet? What did the monitor show? Do you need me to bring fresh supplies from the pharmacy on the other side of town?" I dropped everything whenever his heart rhythm acted up, canceled meetings with friends, postponed important work projects to late evening, and spent practically all my salary on expensive imported medicines, vitamins, and rehabilitation courses after his mild stroke. With my own hands, I dug up the garden beds at our country house, did heavy cosmetic repairs there, hauled bags of cement, whitewashed walls, knocked on the doors of district clinics, and fought for subsidized prescriptions. It seemed to me that this was the truest, most genuine filial duty, to give all of myself, every drop of my energy, to the man who gave me life and raised me. I sincerely believed that our bond was unbreakable and that my self-sacrifice would be truly appreciated. That quedó. But this familiar, years-long routine collapsed in a single evening in early June, when Dad called me with a completely different, hitherto unknown enthusiasm in his voice. Judging by his tone, his eyes were once again shining with that youthful spark I hadn't seen since Mom's death. He talked excitedly, interrupting himself, beginning to tell me that he had met an amazing, stunning woman in the park. Her name was Rose. My first in-person meeting with her was arranged at a cozy restaurant in the city center. Dad insisted I come, assuring me I would be charmed. And indeed, at first glance, Rose produced a truly dazzling impression. A well-groomed woman just past 50, looking significantly younger than her years, with an impeccable, sophisticated hairstyle, a light trail of expensive selective perfume with notes of amber and bergamot, confident, smooth manners, and a surprisingly soft, enveloping voice. She carried herself with the dignity of a successful business owner, yet looked at Dad as if he were the last hero of a Hollywood melodrama on Earth, with admiration, awe, and undisguised reverence. She hung on his every word, laughed infectiously at his old jokes, and kept casually touching his hand with her well-groomed fingers, featuring an immaculate French manicure. "Sonechka, my dear, I am so happy to finally meet you in person, Rose cooed, hugging me upon meeting so warmly and sincerely that my heart thawed for a split second. Henry has talked about nothing but you these past few days. He has such an incredible, sensitive, caring daughter. I simply bow down to your devotion. It's rare to find such love for parents these days. Her words sounded sweet and flawlessly correct, but deep within her swift, tenacious, and calculating dark chocolate eyes, something cold, sharp, and utterly alien flashed for a fraction of a second, sending an unpleasant, prickly chill running down my spine. It was a fleeting movement of her pupils, betraying a person evaluating the situation not with her heart, but with the cold calculation of an experienced player. At first, I desperately brushed aside these foolish, paranoid suspicions, ashamed of my own selfishness. Dad looked genuinely happy. His slouch had vanished somewhere. He stopped clutching his heart as often, began taking care of his wardrobe, grew interested in politics again, and even resumed long walks down the alleys of the city park. Rose moved into his apartment just a month after they met, explaining that, at our age, it's a sin to waste time living apart when the clock is ticking so fast. And right there, the moment the front door slammed shut behind her as the full-fledged mistress of the house, the first serious cracks began to show in our fragile family facade. Insidiously, methodically, step by step, masking everything as care for Henry's health, Rose began to build an invisible yet completely impenetrable cocoon of isolation around him. First, she, completely by accident, forgot to pass along phone calls and regards from his old university friends and late mother's colleagues, smiling softly and citing that elderly people shouldn't get too stressed, overload their heads with idle chatter, or get distracted from taking their vitamins. Then, under the pretext of needing peace and quiet, visits from neighbors who used to check in on Henry since his younger days were gradually phased out. When I tried to gently and delicately hint to Dad over Sunday tea that completely cutting him off from his old circle and long-standing habits wasn't the best idea for his psychological state, the first truly terrifying, deafening scandal of my life broke out. Dad, who had always been a soft, understanding, and conflict-free person with me, suddenly turned crimson with surging anger, slammed his cup down onto the saucer so hard the tea splashed onto the tablecloth, and burst into a shrill scream. "You're just a hardcore egoist, Sophia. You're used to keeping me on a short leash like a helpless lapdog, and you're deathly afraid of sharing my attention with anyone else. You like feeling like an irreplaceable martyr, but my personal life is none of your business. Rose is the best thing that has happened to me in the last 10 years since your mother, and you're trying to poison my old age with your pathological jealousy and suspicions. Leave us alone, get a life of your own, and stop sticking your nose where it's not wanted." I stood in the entryway with a bag of his favorite fresh fruit and a jar of expensive honey in my hands, completely stunned, paralyzed by this undeserved, cruel stream of accusations. A choking lump caught in my throat, and my stinging eyes burned with hot tears of hurt. I had given this man my best young years, dissolved myself in his problems, forgotten my own dreams and career, and in return received a public slap in the face and a spit in the soul. After that terrible scandal and the undeserved accusations of selfishness, an invisible but dense concrete wall seemed to grow between Dad and me. I started visiting less often, not because I loved him less, but simply because every appearance in my parents' apartment now left a deep, aching aftertaste in my heart. Phone conversations turned into dry protocol reports. "Yes, Dad, I took my vitamins." "Yes, everything is fine at work." "No, I can't drop by today. I'm snowed under with a project." Henry replied briefly, avoiding long chats, and in the background I could clearly hear Rose's soft, soothing, yet domineering voice skillfully conducting his every word. About a month passed. A nagging premonition wouldn't leave me for a single minute. It felt to me as though behind this facade of ostentatious idol and care lay something far more ominous than just an elderly man's late romance. And my fears were completely confirmed on a Thursday when I unexpectedly had a day off work. I decided to surprise Dad, drop by during the day, bring his favorite berry pie from the bakery near my house, and pick up his winter jackets for dry cleaning. Approaching the familiar door on the third floor, I routinely reached into my purse for my duplicate keys. But turning the key in the keyhole didn't work. The lock was bolted from the inside with an extra security latch that was normally only put on at night. I pressed the doorbell persistently, expecting to hear the shuffle of Dad's slippers or Rose's smooth footsteps. A suspicious silence lingered behind the door for a long time. Finally, heavy, confident footsteps were heard, the lock clicked, and the door opened a crack on its safety chain. In the narrow gap appeared the face of an unfamiliar young guy of about 25, with an insolent grin, disheveled hair, and sweatpants with sagging knees. "Who are you and what do you want?" He spat through his teeth, looking me up and down with the cloudy gaze of someone just woken up in the middle of the day. My jaw dropped. I sharply pushed the door with my shoulder, making the flimsy chain strain. "Who the hell are you? And what are you doing in my father's apartment? Open the door right now, or I'm calling the police!" The commotion in the entryway drew attention. From deep inside the apartment came Henry's frightened voice, followed by Rose appearing in the hallway. She wore an expensive silk bathrobe, her face a mask of insulted dignity, but a nasty, cold spark of annoyance flashed in her eyes. "Oh, Sonechka, my girl, we weren't expecting you at all," she chimed in with her signature syrupy voice, trying to push the guy back into the hallway. "Come in, don't make such a loud noise, the neighbors will hear." I pushed her hand away, stepped right into the entryway, and was struck dumb. On the spacious shoe rack, where traditionally only Dad's orthopedic shoes sat neatly, sat huge, dirty, stinking size 11 sneakers. The coat rack groaned under the weight of strangers' jackets, and empty energy drink cans and chip bags littered the chest of drawers. "Rose, what is going on here?" My voice broke into a scream, echoing off the walls of the narrow hallway. "Who is this brute in our apartment?" The guy, casually scratching his shoulder, walked into the living room and sprawled out on Dad's favorite leather couch, propping his feet up on the coffee table, right where Dad had kept his memorable photo albums and history books for years. Rose sighed heavily, theatrically rolling her eyes to the ceiling as if dealing with an unruly child. "Oh, why are you screaming for the whole building to hear, Sophia? Meet my son Cameron. He just arrived in the capital from another region, and he'll be living with us for a while until he finds a normal job and rents an apartment. He's a young guy. He needs to get a foothold in the big city, and the living space here is big. High ceilings. There's plenty of room for everyone." My breath caught from such impudent audacity. "What living space? What plenty of room for everyone?" I gasped with indignation. "This is my father's apartment. Our family lived here all our lives. You brought some shady brood in here without our consent, without a single word of warning. Dad, have you lost your mind? You let this bore take over your house." I turned to Dad, who stood timidly, hunched over completely, in the doorway of the kitchen, hiding his eyes and twisting the hem of his plaid shirt in his trembling fingers. I expected him to get angry, slam his fist on the table, yell at this pushy woman, and throw the insolent stepson out the door along with his energy drink cans. But Henry raised a guilty, frightened, completely hollow look at me, sighed heavily, and muttered quietly in a foreign, weak voice. "Sophia, please, don't make a scene over nothing. Cameron will live with us as long as needed. It's hard for him. The house is genuinely spacious. And besides, mind your own business. I'll figure out who lives here myself." These words burned me worse than boiling water. My own father, for whom I had laid down the best years of my youth, health, and nerves on the altar, had just openly betrayed me in favor of some strange, insolent man they had dragged into our house behind my back. And Cameron, hearing support from the master of the apartment, lazily turned on the couch and threw an insulting grin in my face. "Listen here, the old man already spoke in plain English. Stop rocking the boat and throwing circuses. Get out of here with your pies. Stop getting on our nerves. There are new rules here now." At that moment, a freezing fear gripped my chest. It finally dawned on me. This wasn't just an elderly man's late romance. This was a meticulously planned, methodical corporate raid on someone else's property, in which my father was no longer the master, but a frightened, broken pawn. A couple of weeks passed since that memorable day when I first saw Cameron in our apartment. Those were 2 weeks of non-stop nightmare, dull anxiety, and a sticky sense of my own powerlessness. My attempts to call Dad and talk to him face-to-face hit an insurmountable wall. Either the line was busy, or Rose picked up the phone, reporting in a honey-sweet voice that Henry is resting after procedures and is in no mood for idle chatter right now. Whenever I did manage to exchange a couple of routine phrases with Dad, his voice sounded rehearsed, lifeless, and detached, as if he were reading a script from someone else's piece of paper at gunpoint. Meanwhile, Cameron settled into the apartment as if he had been born there. Neighbors on the landing had already complained to me during a chance meeting about constant nighttime noise, loud music, and garbage that this young man left right in the common stairwells. He didn't bother looking for a job or studying. Judging by everything, his main task was round-the-clock presence on the premises, moral pressure on the old man, and creating an atmosphere of constant psychological tension. Rose openly reigned in the apartment, not even bothering to mask herself as a caring companion. She ordered family items around, rearranged furniture, and for some reason, pictures of my late mother in silver frames disappeared from the dresser, replaced by cheap, glossy calendars featuring real estate agency logos. I rushed between work, my rental apartment, and my father's house, trying to think of at least some legal way to stop this lawlessness. But lawyers I consulted threw up their hands. As long as the owner is competent and voluntarily lets strangers into the apartment, the police and courts are powerless. It was necessary either to prove Dad's incompetence or to find irrefutable evidence of a forcible seizure of property or blackmail. I had no idea that this long-awaited, irrefutable trump card would fall into my hands completely by accident, thanks to Henry's ordinary domestic helplessness. It was a rainy, chilly Tuesday. A cold autumn wind howled outside, stripping the last blackened leaves from the trees and hurling them against car windows. Around noon, Dad's name lit up on my phone screen. My heart traditionally skipped a beat with a bad premonition. He rarely called on his own lately. I instantly accepted the call. Dad's voice sounded pathetic, broken, and unusually pitiful. It once again carried those inflections of a miserable, confused old man that always unfailingly tugged at my filial strings. "Sophia, daughter, for God's sake, help me out!" He stumbled over his words, breaking into a light, rasping cough. "The new laptop Rose gave me for our anniversary just won't listen to this old fool. I'm trying to transfer old family photos there from the old tablet, where your mom and I are still young and happy, but everything freezes there, files disappear, and I don't understand any of this digital junk." Rose, of all times, went to a notary for some urgent household business. She won't be home all day. Cameron went somewhere for his young person business. "Please come, save Dad, help me move the pictures before I delete everything completely." There was such absolute, childish helplessness in his voice that all the accumulated grievances of recent weeks, the coldness, detachment, and bitterness from the recent scandal, vanished in a single instant. I forgot about my own fatigue, burning work deadlines, and that unpleasant feeling of sticky fear that had settled in me after Cameron's visit. I remembered only one thing. He is my dad. The very man who raised me, carried me in his arms, read me fairy tales in the evenings, and protected me after Mom's death. I had no other close people left in this world. I asked for time off work, citing urgent family circumstances, and 40 minutes later, I was there. Climbing to the 3rd floor, I quietly unlocked the door with my keys and entered the entryway. An unusual, heavy, ringing silence hung in the apartment. Rose and her adult son were indeed absent, having left on their murky business. Dad sat in the bedroom, wrapped in a warm plaid woolen blanket, and monotonously dozed to the dull, droning murmur of the television, leaving the bedroom door slightly ajar. I didn't want to disturb him. Stepping on tiptoes into the kitchen, I looked around. Both gadgets lay on the kitchen table, the old battered tablet in a worn leather case with frayed corners, and the shiny brand-new laptop in a strict silver metal casing. Dad's small voice recorder lay nearby, an old model with a disc that he loved to dictate his memoirs, shopping lists, and memorable notes about the past into from time to time. I carefully pulled out a chair, sat at the wooden table, connected the adapter cord, and opened the File Explorer on the new laptop's desktop to start the process of moving the heavy folder containing the family photo archive. The process went agonizingly, unbearably slowly. The loading indicator crawled at a turtle's pace, freezing on every heavy RAW file or old scanned pictures from family albums 20 years old. To somehow pass these agonizing minutes of waiting and simultaneously check if the system drive was clogged with junk files or duplicates, I decided to look into the standard folder with voice notes and voice recorder recordings automatically synchronized from the old tablet. The folder turned out to be impressive, consisting of hundreds of audio files with Dad's incoherent notes. But my gaze instantly caught the very top file. It was marked with a completely fresh date. The recording was made just 3 days ago, on the exact day when I supposedly was supposed to come for a family dinner but canceled the visit at the last moment due to a workload emergency at work. The file name consisted of a long digital code automatically generated by the operating system. My right hand holding the computer mouse suddenly trembled finely, and my fingertips tingled. Yielding to some bad internal premonition, I double left-clicked on the playback icon, hoping to hear Dad's familiar mumbling voice rehearsing fragments of his memoirs. From the tiny built-in speakers of the tablet, instead of memoirs, burst a sharp, confident, domineering, and utterly alien female voice to this house. It was Rose speaking. She spoke loudly, without a hint of that syrupy affection, hypocritical care, and honeyed purring with which she invariably addressed my father in my presence. The tone was exclusively businesslike, cold, calculating, and cynical, the kind people usually use at wholesale warehouses when discussing defective goods or writing off unnecessary junk. You understand perfectly well, Henry, that your precious little daughter will get jack shit in case of anything. Not this apartment in the center. She hammered out every word, and every sound fell on my consciousness like molten lead. The apartment and the country house must be fully registered in the name of my Cameron. My boy has a family, grandiose plans, business. He needs to develop, hustle, and expand. And your Sophia is someone else's kid. She'll manage somehow in rental corners. She's not a little girl. She'll earn it herself. A short, heavy, ringing pause hung on the recording. I sat in front of the screen, pressed into the back of the chair, not daring to take a full breath, panically afraid of scaring off this nightmare, desperately hoping that I had simply misheard, and this was some stupid radio play or audio codec glitch. Then, my own father's voice came out of the speakers. It sounded weak, broken, with a clear tinge of fear and internal bargaining. "Rose, wait! Well, how can that be? Sophia took care of me for so many years, supplied me with medicines, sat by the bed at night when my blood pressure went through the roof. You can't just do that to her, after all. It's inhumane and vile before my wife's blessed memory." In response to his timid, pitiful objections, Rose's short, ominous, soul-freezing laughter echoed from the speakers. From this sound, large goosebumps ran down my spine, and a heavy ice lump coiled in my stomach. "Oh, stop whining with your cheap sentiments, old man," she snorted contemptuously. "That fool will continue to take care of you absolutely for free anyway, take you to clinics for free, buy expensive groceries, and change your sheets because she is stupidly devoted to you like a trained dog on a leash. She won't even guess about anything as long as you're smoking the sky, and after your death, Cameron and I will quickly kick her out the door with one suitcase in hand, and no top lawyer will prove anything to her because all the papers will be executed impeccably cleanly and legally flawlessly." Dead silence fell in the kitchen. Only heavy raindrops drumming monotonously and dismally against the window ledge outside could be heard. I froze, waiting for Dad to finally get angry, slam his fist on the table, kick this cynical scammer out of the house, and defend my honest daughter's name. But seconds ticked by, turning into minutes. Then my father's voice sounded. Henry sighed heavily, with some disgusting, treacherous relief, as if he had shaken off the last remaining scrap of conscience that had weighed on him all these years, and distinctly, without a shadow of doubt, stated, "You're right, Rose. Why should some stranger's kid get our property? Cameron is young. He needs it more in life. Go ahead and draw up the deed of gift at the notary next week. I'll sign whatever is needed. Just stop picking my brain all day long. I sat in front of this glowing screen in an empty, already alien kitchen to me, and it felt as though a bottomless abyss had finally opened up beneath my feet. My whole life, every sleepless night by his bed, all the tears shed over cardiology records, genuine filial love, devotion, and care, all of it was trampled, sold, valued at a penny, and thrown into the trash for a couple of sweet words from a pushy stranger. I wasn't a biological daughter to him, not a beloved child worth living for. I was a convenient, free tool, a cyborg to service his old age until the cherished hour came to sign over square meters to someone else's man. But the shock from the listened recording suddenly gave way to a cold, murderous realization when several hidden files were discovered on the tablet's hard drive in the neighboring folder with automatic cloud backups. Moving the cursor, I opened a text document dated the month of Dad's acquaintance with Rose. It turned out to be a detailed business plan report compiled by Cameron's own hand, where step-by-step instructions detailed how exactly to isolate an elderly person from relatives, what drugs to give to suppress will, and in what sequence to execute heir waivers through bribed notaries. Dad hadn't just agreed. He was drawn into this game from the very beginning, either consciously betraying me for a young wife or completely under her medicinal control. This twist completely turned my understanding of the situation upside down. The pain pushed back, giving way to cold reason. I realized that leaving silently and leaving them the battlefield meant signing off on my own weakness and handing them everything they aimed for. With a single movement of the mouse, I selected the entire folder with compromising audio recordings and the planning document, transferred them to my personal secure flash drive, encrypted the archive, and sent a copy to Nathaniel's secure cloud server. After that, I returned the tablet to its original place, carefully closed the laptop lid, and left Dad's bedroom, where he was still peacefully dozing to the murmur of the television. On the threshold of the apartment, I turned back, casting a final glance at the empty entryway. Inside me, there were no more tears or resentment. There was only iron determination to play this game through to the end, but on my own terms. I quietly locked the door and walked out into the night, knowing tomorrow would change everything forever. Stepping out of the porch of my father's house, under the cool, prickly drops of autumn rain, I didn't feel the previous heaviness. Inside me, everything was burned out as if by a pure, crystal-cold flame. The shock from my father's betrayal and Rose's cynical monologue didn't break me. On the contrary, it crystallized in me extreme concentration, steel endurance, and ringing clarity of mind. My brain, accustomed for years to solving complex logistical tasks, organizing multi-stage medical care, coordinating doctors, and balancing tight work deadlines with family crises, instantly switched to ruthless crisis management mode. I sat in the car cabin, threw my bag on the passenger seat, and before starting the engine, opened the encrypted archive on my secure flash drive again. In front of me, those exact audio files and hidden text documents I copied from Dad's tablet flickered on the smartphone screen. I began studying them meticulously, line by line, file by file, completely disconnecting any emotions like a surgeon examining scans of an advanced tumor. What opened to my sight in Cameron's business documents and Rose's rough drafts exceeded my worst expectations. This wasn't just a spontaneous mismatch of an elderly person or a trivial attempt by a pushy woman to set up her adult son at someone else's expense. It was a detailed, methodically compiled, cynical instruction on psychological, social, and medicinal squeezing of me out of my father's life for the complete seizure of liquid real estate in the city center and the country plot. In a file characteristically named project_henry_final.docx, absolutely everything was spelled out point by point, turning a human life into a cold business plan. Initial stage: reconstruction and winning trust. Acquaintance in the park according to a practice scheme. Rose used professional acting skills, feminine charms, and psychological triggers to create an illusion of love at first sight and late romantic salvation, instantly attaching an elderly, vulnerable person suffering from attention deficit after his wife's death. Isolation from the outside world. Gradual but strict termination of any phone calls, visits from old friends, late mother's colleagues, and neighbors under the plausible pretext of caring for health, the need to protect nerves, and shielding Henry from idle chatter. Medicinal support and suppression of will. A separate table listed a detailed list of mild sedatives, neuroleptics, and tranquilizers. Rose regularly mixed them into Dad's tea under the guise of harmless vitamins, anti-aging supplements, and morning tea to cause slight spatial disorientation, slowed reactions, and make him an absolutely suggestible, pliable piece of clay before signing any legal documents with shady notaries. Financial cleanup and bypassing heirs. The legal mechanism of re-registering ownership rights to the apartment and country house to Cameron through a chain of gifting, executing fictitious promissory notes, and obtaining fake medical certificates regarding the daughter's alleged voluntary refusal of any inheritance claims due to her complete self-removal and indifference. But the scariest discovery, piercing me sharper than a blade, was that Dad wasn't just under chemical drug influence. In one of the earliest voice files, Henry himself consciously discussed with Rose how exactly to conveniently get rid of Sophia's annoying care so she wouldn't interfere with their deals. He knew about Cameron's plans from the very beginning. His shock and righteous anger on the day of our first scandal turned out to be merely a brilliantly staged performance by two experienced manipulators. I sat in the dark cabin of the car, looking at the reflection of passing cars' headlights in the windshield, and understood with absolute clarity. I had in my hands the most powerful, exhaustive compromat capable of destroying this criminal empire of deception down to its foundations. But acting alone, going to the local police precinct with this, or filing a civil lawsuit without heavy legal artillery was impossible. Local precinct officers and first-instance judges often brush off family squabbles, considering them ordinary household arguments over square meters. I needed an absolute heavyweight in criminal and civil law. I sharply turned the ignition key, steered the car out of the yard, and dialed a number I hadn't troubled for several years. My old university friend, brilliant, tough, and ruthless in court, Attorney Nathaniel. "Sophia?" he answered in surprise on the second ring, hearing my call in the middle of the night. "Haven't heard from you in 100 years. Why are you calling at this hour? Your voice sounds ironclad. Did something happen?" "Nathaniel, hi," I replied evenly, chiseling every word without unnecessary introductions. "It happened. I need your help. Not just a consultation over a cup of coffee, but a full-fledged, tough special operation to save the inheritance and expose professional fraudsters who have closed in on my father. I have blackmail audio recordings, medical records, text isolation plans, and irrefutable evidence of fraud. Are you ready for a big war?" Nathaniel paused on the other line for a second, digesting the information, and then his voice broke into that professional excitement and cold calculation for which opponents in court feared him so much. "Send the encrypted archive right now to my secure server. I'll expect you at my office tomorrow at 9 in the morning. Let's start the hunt." I hung up, slammed my foot on the gas pedal, and drove confidently home. For the first time in recent months of heavy anxiety, I knew every single next step precisely. No tears, no pity, and no more compromises. Only a cold mind and a mirror-like, devastating blow to those who decided to trample my devotion. While Nathaniel and I, in his cozy office stacked with heavy volumes of codes, were developing a multi-stage legal trap, reality in my father's apartment was rapidly turning into uncontrollable chaos. My sudden and complete disappearance from the horizons of their familiar daily life, the halt of daily calls, grocery shopping, and refusal to perform the functions of a free caregiver caught Rose and Cameron off guard. They counted on customary submissiveness, that I would cry into my pillow, grumble, but in a couple of days run back again with bags full of delicacies and medicines. But when a day passed, then a second, and my number stubbornly answered with long tones or went into blocking mode, real panic started in their camp. My mobile phone began heating up from incoming calls and messages as early as Wednesday. At first, Dad tried to play on sympathy, using his best manipulative techniques that had worked on me unfailingly for years. His messages in the messenger poured one after another, bristling with spelling errors and exclamation points. "Sophia, my daughter, Where did you disappear? My blood pressure shot up to 200 again. My head is splitting as if caught in a vice. Rose has no idea what pills to give me. She mixed up the morning dose with the evening one. Come back immediately. Bring the right drops. You're leaving your father to die alone. I looked silently at the screen without answering a single word. I knew from medical charts and Cameron's records that the pressure spikes were triggered precisely by those experimental vitamins Rose slipped into his tea to suppress his will. And now that I stopped monitoring the medication intake, dosages floated, and Dad's body began to malfunction. When it became obvious that I no longer reacted to sympathy, the tone of the messages sharply changed. Cameron joined Dad's pleas, whose vocabulary quickly slipped into outright street profanity, threats, and hysteria. Listen here, you selfish creature. If you aren't in the apartment in 2 hours, we are filing an official police report stating you abandoned your helpless, incompetent father in danger. We'll drag you through the courts so hard you'll lose your job and wind up on the heating mains with mixed feelings. Come back and do what you must, or blame yourself. The phone vibrated from an endless stream of threats, calls from unknown numbers, and voice messages in which Rose shrieked with a torn voice, vowing to destroy me at the first opportunity. They tried to intimidate me, break me psychologically, and make me run back out of fear of the police and imaginary courts. But they didn't understand the main thing. Every call, every insult, every threat and blackmail was automatically recorded by specialized recording software on my second secure smartphone set up by Nathaniel. We were building an ironclad evidence base against them for criminal prosecution under extortion and threat charges. Without my daily intervention, cleaning, medication control, and strict schedule, life in the apartment turned into a nightmare for the squatters themselves. Rose, who planned to quietly, cleanly, and without extra fuss re-register property to herself, suddenly faced the fact that a capricious, sick old man experiencing withdrawal symptoms from the cancellation of her little vitamins needed round-the-clock care. She had to stand at the stove, wash dishes, listen to Dad's tedious complaints, and try to simulate care she was completely unequipped for. Cameron raged in the empty rooms because due to the rising noise, they were afraid to bring a notary yet for the final signing of the deed of gift. The siege lasted exactly 3 days. On Friday afternoon, a key message arrived from Rose herself, short, ultimatum-driven, and insolent. Stop playing comedy and hiding in holes, Sophia. Tomorrow at exactly 3 in the afternoon, we expect you at that quiet cafe on the corner of the Central Avenue. We'll discuss the fate of the inheritance and your old man one last time. If you don't come, you'll regret it for the rest of your days. We'll find a way to leave you without a penny. I showed this message to Nathaniel. The lawyer smiled complacently, leaning back in his chair. Splendid. They're walking straight into the trap. They're sure they broke you. Tomorrow, we'll let them have that confidence to the end. Friday flew by in nervous but precise tension. Nathaniel and I worked out the scenario for tomorrow's meeting step by step. The lawyer personally checked all the equipment. A miniature professional hiddenware voice recorder with cryptographic signal encryption, a backup microphone in the coat lapel, and a secure communication channel transmitting the audio stream to a remote server in real time. Nathaniel emphasized the main point. My task was not to break into screams, not to threaten back, but to give Rose the opportunity to fully open up, express all her threats, demands, and demonstratively show her true face as an uncompromising blackmailer. Saturday turned out overcast, windy, and uncomfortably cold. A low, leaden sky pressed down on roof peaks, and a fine, drizzling rain tried to crawl under the coat collar. I arrived at the designated cafe on the Central Avenue exactly 10 minutes before the appointed time. It was a quiet, dimly lit establishment with heavy velvet window drapes, rare dim lamps on tables, and an almost complete absence of daylight, an ideal place for secret deeds where nobody would pay attention to strangers' conversations. I chose a secluded corner table with a soft, semicircular booth, sat with my back to the wall to keep the entire entrance hall in view, and ordered a cup of strong black coffee without sugar to wake up my nervous system. My hands didn't tremble. Inside me reigned the cold, crystal confidence of a professional surgeon preparing for a complex operation. Rose appeared at exactly 3 in the afternoon. She looked as if she had gathered not for a business meeting with her stepdaughter, but for a high society rout or a contemporary art exhibition opening. She wore a luxurious, long, natural mink fur coat in a deep chocolate shade, impeccable salon styling with light Hollywood curls, an expensive and heavy trail of perfume with notes of patchouli and leather, and a fake, predatory smile played on her lips that I first spotted the day we met. She walked with a confident, smooth stride to the table, tossed her designer bag onto the leather booth with a slight thud, gracefully sat down opposite me, and gestured to a waiter without even deigning to say hello. "Well, hello, our homegrown rebel!" She started right away, lazily pulling leather gloves off her fingers and leaning back against the booth's backrest. Her tone was full of complacent superiority and open contempt. "I see you played at Independence, sat around in corners, and enough? The circus with disappearances has dragged on, Sonechka. Time to return to the real world." I silently took a sip of scalding coffee, looking straight into her unblinking gaze, and uttered in an even voice devoid of any emotions. "I'm only here to hear why you called me, Rose. I have neither time nor desire to drive up the price of your performance." Rose laughed quietly, shortly, unpleasantly, with notes of absolute confidence in her impunity. She leaned her torso forward, bringing her well-groomed face close to mine, and lowered her voice to a cold, confident hiss. "You've completely lost your boundaries, my girl. Do you fancy yourself the hero of some detective series? Time to take off rose-colored glasses. Your precious old man has already signed all preliminary papers at the notary. The apartment in the center and the country house passed to my Cameron, period. None of your childish tantrums, boycotts, and attempts to blackmail us will change that fact." She paused, relishing the effect produced, and continued hammering out every word with freezing cynicism. "If you don't stop your circus right now, return to the apartment and resume normal care for the old man, we will destroy you legally. My lawyers will file countersuits for defamation, moral damages, and your elderly father whom you supposedly abandoned in a helpless state. You'll fly out of work with a wolf ticket, go through courts paying such fines that you'll be paying off at the supermarket cash register for the rest of your days. Understand me? Pack your things, go back to the house, tend to Henry for free, and after his death, vacate the living space nicely. This is your last chance to get off with minor bloodshed." Every single word of hers, every sound of her domineering, arrogant voice was clearly captured by the miniature recorder on my coat and flew through the secure channel straight to Nathaniel's server, forming an ironclad body of evidence for a criminal case on extortion and blackmail charges. I sat motionless, feeling a cold, victorious flower of absolute triumph bloom inside me. She herself, voluntarily, without any pressure from my side, laid all her cards on the table, signing her own verdict with her own tongue. I slowly stood up from the table, looking down at her with such cold contempt that the corners of Rose's painted lips twitched for a second. "Bon appetit, Rose," I stated clearly, chiseling every syllable. "You just said everything necessary. Pack suitcases for your Cameron. Soon we will meet in a completely different place, in the investigator's office." Without waiting for her reply, I spun on my heels and walked with a confident, light stride toward the exit of the cafe, leaving the stunned stepmother, who had lost all her bravado, sitting in the twilight over a cup of cooling coffee. The game was played. The trap slammed shut tight. Saturday evening, night, and Sunday merged for Nathaniel and me into a single, feverish, and merciless marathon. We didn't close our eyes for almost 30 hours straight. A specific twilight reigned in the lawyer's office, illuminated only by monitor screens and desk lamps, while stacks of printouts, legal codes, and medical certificates piled up around us. Our task was to turn the fragmented pieces of chaos into a monolithic, irrefutable legal document against which the defense would not have a single chance left. Nathaniel operated with the filigree precision of a surgeon. We brought everything together. Decrypted extortion audio recordings from the dimly lit cafe with a cryptographic timestamp, copies of those very ominous files from Dad's tablet, including a detailed plan for isolating the pensioner, as well as medical records from narcological and therapeutic databases proving the regular use of potent psychotropic substances without prescription from specialized doctors. Completing the picture were official written testimonies from landing neighbors who confirmed facts of psychological pressure, nighttime scandals, and the presence of an unauthorized, aggressive individual in the house represented by Cameron. On Monday, at precisely 9 in the morning, our hefty package of documents landed on the desk of the head of the investigative department for especially grave crimes. Nathaniel personally knew the head of the department, which eliminated bureaucratic red tape and attempts to hush up the case locally. The machine of the state law enforcement and judicial system spun with the deafening, ruthless speed of a steamroller. For experienced investigators, this entire fraud scheme turned out to be a textbook, academic example of classic modern black real estate agency, where instead of physical violence, sophisticated psychological manipulation, pharmaceutical suppression of an elderly person's will, and artificial isolation from relatives were used. On Wednesday at dawn, when the city was just waking up under a gray veil of morning mist, a rapid response operational group, accompanied by an investigative committee investigator and special forces operatives in full gear, burst into Dad's apartment. The element of surprise was absolute, leaving no time for maneuvers or destroying evidence. Cameron, who hadn't even managed to properly wake up and was lounging on Dad's favorite leather couch in the same worn sweatpants with sagging knees, didn't even manage to figure out what was happening when the cold metal of handcuffs snapped onto his wrists. His arrogant grin vanished in a fraction of a second, replaced by panicked animal fear. Rose, hearing the crash in the entryway, leaped out of the bedroom in her silk bathrobe. At first, she tried to turn on her usual charm, and then to throw a tantrum, waving some preliminary deed of gift agreements and loudly declaring, "Police arbitrariness!" But her fervor instantly faded the moment the investigator read aloud the dry list of incriminated articles. Fraud committed by an organized group of persons on an especially large scale, seizure of someone else's property by deception and abuse of trust, and illegal impact on the psyche and will of an incapacitated citizen using potent substances. Simultaneously with criminal prosecution, Nathaniel unfolded a second front, civil. An emergency lawsuit was filed in the district court to recognize all preliminary assignment, gifting, and agreement contracts as null and void based on civil code articles on unconscionable transactions made under the influence of delusion, threats, and intentional misleading of a person in a dependent psychophysical state. When this fragile but brazen card empire of lies collapsed in a single instant under the weight of irrefutable evidence, rats, as usual, fled the sinking ship first, betraying each other without the slightest pangs of conscience. Cameron, facing the grim prospect of a real criminal sentence of 8 to 15 years in a strict regime penal colony in the company of far from the most intellectual cellmates in pretrial detention, cracked on his very first official interrogation. He ratted out his mother completely, enthusiastically telling the investigator all the details of their family criminal plan, shifting full responsibility onto her and claiming that she thought it all up and he was just a stupid boy following instructions. Rose, learning of her own son's betrayal, beat herself in hysteria against the concrete walls of the pretrial detention cell, tearing her voice and cursing that ill-fated day she accidentally met Henry in the city park. All her expensive makeup, fake gloss, trail of elite perfume, and pretentious importance evaporated, exposing an ordinary petty swindler tangled up in her own greed. They disappeared from our lives just as rapidly and dirtily as they appeared in them. After conducted investigative actions and an inventory of property, only empty, stripped walls, heaps of plastic garbage in the kitchen, empty energy drink cans, syringes with drug residue, and the bitter aftertaste of someone else's presence remained in the apartment. Dad's apartment emptied out again, but this time, in this ringing silence, there was no longer the stench of someone else's deceit. Only ashes remained, which had to be thoroughly swept out. The final point in this hard, soul-wrenching story awaited me neither in the courtroom nor on the threshold of a notary's office, but in the sterile, smelling of bleach, cheap medicines, and hospital sorrow ward of the city cardiology department. There, into the intensive care unit, after searches, account seizures, the confiscation of all fake documents, and the complete collapse of his fictional world, Henry was delivered. Sudden, crushing stress. The realization of the bitter truth that he had been used as a pawn, cynically betrayed by those for whom he was ready to renounce his own flesh and blood, as well as the sharp, painful withdrawal of those very vitamin psychotropic drugs he had been stuffed with for months, did their job. The elderly man's body took a terrible plunge. Dad collapsed with a severe hypertensive crisis, suffered a mild heart attack on his feet, and most importantly, plunged into the abyss of a deep, destructive nervous breakdown that turned him into a shadow of his former self. When I pushed open the heavy white door of the ward, that familiar, unbearably dreary hospital scent hit my nose. On a narrow spring-net cot covered with gray institutional linen sat no longer that self-confident, albeit hunched man who had just recently shouted at me with foam at the mouth in the entryway, accusing me of hardcore egoism and pathological jealousy. Before me lay a deeply unhappy, dried-up, physically shrunken old man with sunken cheeks, dark circles under faded eyes, and sparse gray stubble that nobody had shaved. During those long weeks while the investigation was underway, expert opinions were announced, and Rose's property was seized. Absolutely nobody came to visit him in the hospital. Neither that loving wife, who swore eternal fidelity to him on soft couches, nor her brave son Cameron, who fled responsibility at the first serious threat of a prison sentence. They all dissolved into nothingness, leaving Henry alone with frightening silence, cold walls, and the burden of his own mistakes. Hearing the creak of the opening door and footsteps, Henry turned his head on the hard pillow with incredible, painful difficulty. His dim, tear-faded eyes caught my figure standing on the threshold. At that moment, an acute, soul-rending suffering and childish confusion flashed in his dull pupils, making my nose sting for a second. He tried to raise himself on a creaking elbow, wheezing heavily, and reached out to me from under the thin blanket with trembling hands scratched by IV needles and bruises. "Sophia, daughter." His voice broke into a pitiful, strained wheeze, turning into inconsolable crying. "Forgive. For Christ's sake, forgive an old, out-of-his-mind fool. My head was clouded. They stuffed me with some junk. I was blind, didn't understand a thing. I couldn't live without you, but they took advantage of my loneliness. Forgive me, daughter, I beg you, don't leave me here alone." I walked slowly deep into the ward. I wore a strict dark coat, my hair neatly tied back in a ponytail. I didn't approach the bed closely, nor did I take his outstretched hands into my palms like I used to do out of habit. I stopped 2 steps away from him, crossing my arms over my chest in a defensive gesture, and looked at him with a long, heavy, yet surprisingly calm gaze of a person who had finally freed themselves from the chains of guilt. Inside me, storms of resentment no longer raged, fury no longer boiled, and there was no thirst for revenge. Absolute, ringing, cool emptiness reigned there, the exact emptiness left behind in place of a burnt-out old forest when the first green grass of a new life begins to sprout. "I forgive you, Dad," I said quietly but distinctly, chiseling every word in the ringing silence of the ward so he could hear and understand every letter. "I forgive you for all the grievances, for those words, for the betrayal, and for what you allowed our family to turn into." His face lit up for a second with pitiful, timid hope, but my next voice shattered it to the foundation. "But I won't return to the past, Dad, and living under the same roof, shouldering your household chores and your problems, I will no longer do. I won't leave you to die. I will pay all the bills for this hospital, find and hire a professional, responsible caregiver who will come on schedule, take you for walks, and monitor your treatment. But that's it. Emotionally, mentally, and territorially, you and I are strangers. Live on with the choice you made with your own hands." Henry convulsively sighed, his lips trembled, and he collapsed powerlessly back onto the pillow, covering his face with his emaciated palms, from beneath which hot, bitter tears of belated repentance flowed profusely. But I was no longer looking at him. I spun on my heels without saying another word, and walked with a confident, light gait out of the ward into the hospital corridor flooded with bright daylight. Fresh spring air smelling of thawed snow and fresh earth drifted through the open window. A month later, all formalities were completed. I officially registered the sale of that old apartment on the Central Street, which over recent years had filled with overly heavy, suffocating memories of illness, deceit, and betrayal. I gathered my things, locked the door with a key, and together with Nathaniel boarded the morning train, heading to another large city, to where a clean canvas, a new job, a bright rental apartment with large windows, and absolute freedom from other people's manipulations awaited me. I earned the right to live for myself, and I will never let anyone destroy this new world of mine ever again. Sophia's story isn't just about fraud. It's about how vulnerable we become when we place another person's interests above our own lives. Personally, I see 3 harsh but necessary lessons here. Don't expect gratitude where it cannot be given. Your selflessness is your choice, but it doesn't obligate other people to you for eternity. Emotions are the worst advisor in a crisis. I've seen dozens of such stories, and my conclusion remains unchanged. Where hysterics begin, the manipulator wins. Only a cool head triumphs. Walking away is not betrayal. My main takeaway from Sophia's story: saving another without destroying yourself is the only right path. If you are asked to sacrifice yourself, you have every right to say no. How do you feel, dear friends? Did Sophia do the right thing by showing mercy in the form of paying for care, while completely cutting off close personal ties with her father after such a crushing betrayal? Or should forgiveness be unconditional, regardless of the severity of the act? Write your opinion in the comments. Let's discuss it. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next release. And don't forget to leave a like. Bye, everyone!